Okay, so I'm recording the session. Right now, you guys will receive this WebEx recording after the session is over, together with some practice exercises and some cover pages, so you guys can have the actual credentials to log in and complete the exercises. I have also shared the presentations you're looking at right now in email this morning, so if you want to follow them as I go through the WebEx, fine. You also have them to look at them later on. Thank you, Christina, for confirming audio. So far, I think everyone's okay with the audio right now. So the first presentation that you guys can see on screen. Okay, we have a hand raised. Hold on. Hello, Christina.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, some of my colleagues are having great difficulty logging in. I was on, I could hear you, but obviously there was no green tick. And some of my colleagues are having the same problem.
Okay, well, so far everyone has confirmed audio is okay except for one other person, which is Maria Savidu.
Yes,
But
one of my
everyone else,
colleagues.
okay, so can she hear me?
I don't think she can, no. We're in different offices at the moment, but she was having problems. Oh, she's calling me now. Can you hear him, Maria? No, she can hear you now.
She can, okay, perfect.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Right.
You want to
Thank
meet
you,
me?
Christina.
All right.
Yes, I will. All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Maria, mampai la puto kere ine hine enan trasin on chik.
Okay, so perfect. So thanks, Christina, for using the hand icon. So that's a lesson for everyone else to see how, if you wish to speak up, just click on the hand. I can hear the beep, and I'll unmute you, and we can speak up. So going back to the presentation, the first one we're going to be covering here, as you guys can see on screen, and let me just get my highlighter here. We can see that we're starting with the integration session, okay, for goods requisitioners and buyers. So what we're going to be learning in this presentation is the key fields when raising a shopping cart that will have a direct impact in TM. So those fields that are containing or will contain this critical information that will derive into TM and will be necessary for our planning to occur properly. So let's go into our next slide. We'll see the content and learning objectives. So as we see here, the objective of this presentation is to raise awareness on the existing integration points between source to acquire process. So anything we do in SRM, basically raising a shopping cart, and the Umoja transportation management module. Those critical or those main integration points are the ones we'll see here. First, how the purchasing of freight services will occur from now on. Also, the delivery address and performance location that we add in the shopping cart and how that will have a direct impact in TM. We'll see also the purchasing group. We're all familiar with the purchasing group if we're familiar with raising shopping carts, but now we'll also learn that adding the purchasing group and the correct purchasing group in SRM will link directly with what is called the planner group in TM, which will allow visibility and also allow the person planning the routes and the transportation in TM to view the DTRs and also other documents that you'll require to plan. We'll also understand how the Incoterms and the Incoterm locations are key in the shopping cart and have a direct impact in TM. We will see how the delivery date also has an impact. Same thing for the packing functionality, which some of you may be familiar with. But now we're going to stress the importance of registering the packing, let's say, the packing information that the vendor is providing to us, NECC, and how that will have an impact in TM, and also how selecting the proper vendor will have its impact in TM as well. And finally, we'll look at the UNOE end-to-end process in TM. So we're going to start with basically some integration points in SRM, so we'll be reviewing some fields in the shopping carts that are important as they will have an impact in TM. And then throughout the rest of the session, we're going to go directly into TM and perform a demo so you guys can become familiar with TM and also see how it actually works step by step. So let's go to our first slide and we'll take a quick look at the acronyms. So basically, I won't go over all of them in detail here because we're going to be seeing them throughout the WebEx and the demo, but you should become familiar with some of these acronyms. For example, I'm sure SRM you're familiar with already, but acronyms like DTR, Delivery-Based Transportation Requirement, will be very important in this session. We're all familiar with ECC. We won't see much of the forwarding orders because this is more related to COE and troops transportation management, and we're only covering UNOE, so UN-owned equipment in this session. Become familiar with TM, which is transportation management. LOA's, letter of assist, is also for COE and troops, which we won't cover here. CCP is a system we're also going to become familiar with throughout the WebEx sessions. It's the Carrier Collaboration Portal, where the vendors and freight forwarders will manage events for transportation, and we'll get into that and see that in detail. We'll also become familiar with freight units. These freight units are and how they're linked to DTR documents and inbound delivery documents for UNOE scenarios. We also know about the inbound delivery, POs, purchase orders, SC for shopping cart, and SOW, which is the actual document that will be generated in TM after we have generated our transportation proposals, and it stands for Statement of Work. So these are the basic acronyms we're going to be taking a look at throughout several of the PowerPoint screens we're going to look at now, and also through the demo. So let's go back to our presentation here and move on to our next slide. This next slide you're seeing here is basically the end-to-end scenario, and let me just display everything so we have the view of the full end-to-end. If you guys had a chance to look at this in the, I believe the Kickoff VTC PowerPoint that I shared last week, you became familiar with the steps and the critical points involved in each step. Looking at it now, this is basically focused on UNOE scenarios. So we'll have a different one for tomorrow's session, but we have to become familiar with these stages. So mainly we're going to go over these 4 stages: procurement stage, the planning stage, the procurement of freight, and the executing and monitoring of events. That's the basic 4 stages of the end-to-end process for UNOE. Now, the procurement phase is divided into basically what we do in SRM, which is creating a shopping cart, approving it, submitting their PO, and approving the PO. And here, this is what we're going to learn in our first PowerPoint presentation, which is the one I'm delivering now. We're going to see how these critical fields, purchasing group, delivery address, delivery date, Incoterm rules, vendor, and so on, are going to have an impact later on in the future stages that we see here in TM. We're also going to see how this shopping cart and approval of PO will generate our inbound delivery document, which we're very familiar with already, but we'll see this time how the inbound delivery document in ECC will directly have an impact in TM by creating automatically the DTR and freight unit documents, and we'll see those documents in a bit. We're also going to learn how packing becomes important in ECC, and that's critical in TM, how it'll have a direct impact in TM in the SOW document. And once we've seen this integration aspect, which is the first part of our WebEx, we'll then go into TM to understand how we plan transportation. All right, so we'll see how the planning of transportation is divided into 2 phases here. We have planning for FCA, FOB, DAT, and DAP Incoterms, which are basically vendor stage or vendor delivered portion of the transportation. And then we'll see the Incoterms related to freight forwarders, XWorks, FCA, FOB, and DAT as well. Okay, so we'll see how they're both managed differently. For the goods vendor stage that we see here, we'll see how the system pretty much does all the work for you, but we'll learn how the TM planner, which is the role that you guys are going to be focusing on today, TS01 and 02, and we'll see that in a bit, will be also able to manage the transportation. And then we'll see how the TM planner will have a more involved role when it comes to the Incoterms, XWorks, FCA, FOB, and DAT when we're talking about freight forwarder stages. From there, we'll go into the procurement of freight, so we'll understand that now you'll have to raise a separate shopping cart for freight in SRM, whereas before you would add the freight line, to the actual shopping cart for goods. Now you'll have 2 different shopping carts, one with the goods here, and then at a later stage, we'll create a shopping cart for freight. We'll go through the process as we usually do now, and then we'll see how the second role, the TS02, which is the TM Freight Order Manager, will assign carriers and freight POs to our freight orders and also edit these freight orders. And we'll learn what these freight orders are. And that'll take us to our last stage in the WebEx session, which is the execute and monitor stage, where we'll see how vendors and freight forwarders submit events for each one of the legs in our transportation proposal, as well as how the TM planners can do so for them or on their behalf in TM. Okay, so this is a quick overview of the end-to-end process of what we're going to review today. Okay, so let me move on to our next slide and we'll go through. At any point, if you have a question you would wish to intervene, just click on the hand icon at the bottom of the participants list or write in the chat any question you may have and I'll take care of it. All right, so let's move on to our next slide here and let's see one of the first changes in SRM that will have an impact later on in TM. So the first thing will be the purchasing of freight services. I was going through that at the beginning. So now with the adoption of the TM solution, freight procurement will not be included in the goods shopping cart and purchase orders. Right? That is one of our first things to keep in mind. So no $1 line for freight services. This time what we will do is create a separate shopping cart for freight. So price for freight forwarder's leg will be stated in a separate funded shopping cart and purchase order, right? And that's the one we're going to be attaching our SOW document that we will see in a bit. And that's the one we'll be using to solicit the freight PO. Okay, so we'll move on to our next slide. So first of all, the first integration aspect of TM and SRM is the purchasing of freight services. Let's move on to our next slide. The delivery address. Okay, so we have the delivery address is now a, let's say, an important aspect of SRM and how the impact in TM will be the following, the one I'm displaying here. So delivery address plays a pivotal role through requisitioning and the inbound coordination process. And how is that? So this is how it works. So it is integrated in all 4 modules, but the way it has an impact is the following. So if we add our delivery address in SRM, this will be the actual destination location in TM. So now in the shopping cart itself, we'll have a field to add our delivery address, and this delivery address that we add here will in TM be defined as the consignee address. Okay, the consignee will be like the mission. It's the equivalent to the mission. And by adding this delivery address in SRM, we are now in TM viewing it as the actual destination address. So that's the one thing you guys have to have clear in your mind in this slide, which is that the delivery address is now the destination address in TM. Okay, so we will add our plant as we always do in our shopping carts, but the delivery address is the final destination location in TM. Okay, so our next slide will focus on a second aspect of the delivery address, and we'll keep in mind the terminology. So what you see in this slide is that the delivery address in the shopping cart will have different terminology in PO, SRM, and ECC. So we have the delivery address in SRM is the consignee in TM. So that's quite simple if you remember that. Consignee is delivery address. So when you look at TM, and you see in some of the tabs that we'll be reviewing together now, we'll see terminology like shipper and consignee. Shipper, of course, will be related to the vendor, while the consignee will be related to the actual mission receiving. So in this case, the consignee, if you see in this screenshot, is Brindisi. So Brindisi, UNGSC, will be consignee in TM. And this address here in TM appears this way because we've added it in the delivery address in SRM. All right, so we can move on to our purchasing group. So now we'll understand that the purchasing group, as we already know in SRM, will allow us to view, or will allow the buyers to view the actual shopping cart to be approved. But now it has another linkage in TM. So the purchasing group in SRM is linked to the planner group in TM and may show up as sales group, as terminology could be sales group or actually planning and planner group in TM. But what you need to understand here is that the purchasing group in SRM is linked to the planner group in TM. And what that means is that if you don't add the correct purchasing group in SRM, the planner in TM will not be able to view the documents generated in TM, which are the DTR and the freight unit. And if they cannot see them, they cannot plan them. That's why it's important, this linkage between planner group and purchasing group. Let's see our next point. So purchasing group, as we already know, triggers the buyers who will have access to the shopping cart and purchase orders, but also it triggers the transportation planners who will have access to planned transportation, as I just said. So again, here we go, purchasing group in SRM, defaults, freight procurement purchasing group in TM, and planning execution group. So there's a linkage between the purchasing group and the planning group, as well as for the freight procurement purchasing group. So whatever purchasing group we add in SRM will default in TM for those roles that have to plan or edit FOs. Okay, that's our second critical field in SRM to keep in mind, our second field that will have an integration in TM. Let's move on to our next integration field, which is the Incoterm and location. So the Incoterm selection will impact the type of carrier that is responsible for transportation. Okay, so if we add DAP, for example, as an Incoterm, it'll be the goods vendor who will be responsible for transportation. If we add an Incoterm like XWorks, it'll be the freight forwarder who's responsible for transportation. So depending on the Incoterm that we add in a shopping cart, that will directly have an impact in TM as to who will be responsible for transportation in TM. Now, as planners, we'll still be responsible for planning, but the transportation will be carried upon by either the goods vendor or the freight forwarder, depending on the Incoterm that we've added in our shopping cart. So let's see here a bit more of an explanation. So when items are selected from the contract catalog, the Incoterm is not derived directly as of yet. It may be done later on, maybe in Go Live, but right now it's not derived directly and it needs to be entered manually. So it's important that it is entered manually per line, unless, of course, you're only going to add the Incoterm in the PO and all lines in your shopping cart have the same Incoterm. You can add it at header level in your PO. But in the shopping cart, you should add it at item level. Okay, when items are not from the contract catalog, it's an unfunded shopping cart, the Incoterm can be left blank. All right, our next step here is that the Incoterm is to be selected from a matchbox and the location address is free text. So as you can see in the screenshot, and you guys have this PowerPoint with you, is that you have a matchbox for the actual Incoterm, but the location, which is either the handover location or the shipping point, or the transshipment point, will be added manually. Okay, so in the purchase order, as I was saying before, Incoterm location is a mandatory field. You can add the Incoterm location at header level, and you can add these fields by clicking on the matchbox or writing manually the locations, handover location or destination location. So again, the Incoterm key and the location are critical and integrated fields in SRM that will have a direct impact in TM. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide here, which is the other integration field, the delivery date. So the delivery date, again, will confirm availability with the vendor on the PO, but will also appear in TM as the date at which we have to deliver the goods at the final destination. Okay, the delivery address that we added. So the delivery date that we add in a shopping cart will be the one that appears in TM as the delivery date in TM. So when you're planning, and we'll see that when I go into the demo, you'll see that the delivery date that we added in a shopping cart will be the one appearing in our transportation cockpit, and I'll explain what that is later on as well. Okay, so we see here delivery date at Incoterm location in SRM. Okay, impacts TM as it is used as a baseline date to estimate all other related dates: departure, handover, arrival at destination, and etc. So again, delivery date will have an impact in TM as it's the baseline to estimate all other delivery dates. Okay, so that's the point about the delivery date here. So again, keep that in mind. Delivery date defaults the freight unit start and end date in TM module. And we'll see that once we go into the demo, it'll be easier to see how these delivery dates are displayed in TM. And we'll move on to our next slide. So far, no one has raised their hand or added anything in the Q&A. So I'm moving on. Now, changes in the delivery date, okay? In the inbound delivery will trigger changes in the delivery date at destination in DTR. So still, and this is something that's very important, in TM, if we make any changes in TM, they won't have, let's say, a reversal impact. So changes in TM won't have an impact in ECC or SRM, but changes in SRM and ECC will have an impact in TM. So changes to the delivery date in the inbound delivery document will definitely trigger changes in the delivery date in the DTR documents and freight unit documents in TM. So any changes that you make to the inbound delivery as you do nowadays will have an impact in TM. Okay, in TM we'll be able to see the locations, date, and times, as you guys can see here in this screenshot, but you'll be able to see it better once we go into the demo. Okay, and let's go to our packing. Okay, so packing is critical, especially in UNOE scenarios, because first of all, since usually the inbound coordinators or whoever is responsible for adding the packaging details in ECC, it usually is basing it on what they receive from the vendors. A lot of the times the packing information is not added in ECC. If we do not add the packing information in ECC, it's not reflected in TM. If it's not reflected in TM, the SOW document that we generate once we have planned our transportation will not contain accurate data. So when we start soliciting for freight, we won't provide the actual correct information to the freight forwarders, and thus we won't have the right estimation of cost for transportation. So packing is critical in UNOE scenarios. We know that for STO scenarios, since it's the UN entity that manages the transportation, packing is usually performed. But for UNOE scenarios where vendors are the ones responsible for providing packaging, a lot of the times that packaging information is not added in ECC. So packing has to be updated in the inbound delivery document as it transfers this information to the freight unit in TM. And thus we'll also transfer that information to the SOW document that we will then upload to SRM when soliciting freight. Okay, and we'll go through that as well now in the demo. Okay, so also you have some screenshots here that will show you guys how the packaging information added in ECC will derive in TM. So the weight, volume, and pieces will derive in TM as you see here, and will also show with an icon that says packaged items. So basically those items that you see in TM that do not have this icon here for packaging should not even be planned. Planning should only occur when packaging has been performed. Because if it's not performed, then as I said before, you won't have the correct estimated charges from the freight forwarders. So always take a look at the packaging icon and make sure that the items added, like for example in this case the ambulance, has been packaged. You'll have a package ID and the package ID product. Okay, so I'm moving on to our next slide. And this one takes us to the vendor information. Right, so selecting a vendor in SRM from the SRM contract catalog and the shopping cart, or a supplier in the purchase order, will impact TM in this way. So the same way we added our delivery address and that impacted what was the actual final destination of the transportation, and that showed as consignee, the vendor selected in the shopping cart will be granted access to the carrier collaboration portal and will be able to submit events. All right, so it's important that we select the vendor for several reasons. One being the first one that is displayed on screen here. They will have access to the collaboration portal. Second is that they will be identified in TM as shipper. So we'll have a shipper for the vendor and the consignee will be the mission. So those two fields will have a direct impact in TM. And then the vendor appears as carrier in the vendor delivered freight order. As you can see here, so these two screenshots, if in SRM we are selecting the correct vendor, this vendor will then integrate in TM and will show up here as the shipper. All right, so you see the shipper information here relates to the vendor that we added in SRM, and the consignee is the actual entity receiving the goods that we added in the delivery address. So basically, those are the integration fields in SRM that will have a direct impact in TM. So for integration fields, I'll go back to my first slide here with the end-to-end information. So if any questions, if you have them now, it will be good to go over this end-to-end. Let me just get to it really quick here, and we can go through it and see if we understand the first part of our WebEx, which is this one here. So right now we've just covered this section here for procurement, the one that has to do with shopping carts and the integration fields of purchasing group, delivery address, delivery date, Incoterm, and vendor. So these are the integration fields in SRM for UNOE scenarios that will have a direct impact in the rest of the process in TM. Okay, we've learned that those integration fields will have an impact in the inbound delivery. We learned that we have to now transmit in ECC the packing information from the vendor and how that will generate our DTRs and freight units in TM and will eventually impact how we plan, submit events, and solicit freight in the long run. So before I continue with our next presentation, which is more focused on TM, and then I'll go into the demo, any questions? We've gone through the first half hour of our session. We still have an hour and a half. So if you have a question now, just type it in the Q&A box or raise your hand. Okay, Maria, I see you raise your hand, so I'm unmuting you now. Maria? Hello, Maria? Maria, can you hear me? Can you speak up? All right, I seem to not be able to hear you. You're unmuted, but I don't hear you. If there's any trouble with your audio, just type it in the Q&A and I can look at your question there. Yes, it does seem like the microphone isn't working because right now you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. So if you can just type in your question in the Q&A and I'll just read it out and I can cover it. Any other questions in the meantime? Just click on the hand icon and I can unmute you and you can speak up. If no other questions, I'll just keep moving on to my next presentation and then I'll go into the demo. So I want to cover in the first hour both presentations and the next hour go through the demo. So we have just enough time. Okay, so I'm going to move on as no one seems to be asking any more questions except for Maria. So Maria, if you just type your question in the Q&A, I'll take a look at it. Right, so, okay, so we're back now with our second presentation where we're now going to see the end-to-end process for UN-owned equipment in TM. So we're basically going to be learning now about specific TM Documents and processes. Okay, so the integration fields that we were just discussing now in SRM are going to now be reflected in TM. So whatever it is that we mentioned before, things like the purchasing group with the planner group, the delivery date, the Incoterm, the delivery address, those fields are now going to be reflected in TM. Okay, so we're going to be learning about now these acronyms that we did not see before. So for example, DTR, we're going to be looking at what the DTR exactly stands for. We're also going to be looking at CCP, freight unit, and SOW. Those are basically the acronyms we're going to be covering now. To give you a quick idea of what they are, so the DTR document, which stands for Delivery-Based Transportation Requirement, is exactly that. It's an actual requirement for transportation. This document is automatically generated once your inbound delivery document has been generated after the PO has been approved. So every time you have an inbound, you'll have a DTR. That means that if you have 10 inbound delivery documents, you'll have 10 DTRs, 10 requests for transportation. So this is kind of like a notification for a task to be done in TM. So if you're a TM planner, you will have to log into TM, search for your DTR, and start planning for that DTR. That DTR document is automatically linked to a freight unit or an FU, which is the goods that are being transported or that need to be transported. So the DTR will tell you that the following goods, the freight unit goods, need to be transported to a destination location. Okay, and that will be affected by the delivery address that we added in the shopping cart, the Incoterm that we added in the shopping cart, the delivery date, and so on. Okay, so remember that each inbound delivery document will generate a different DTR and freight unit. So if you have one DTR, you have one freight unit, and you have one inbound. If you have two DTRs, you have two freight units, and you have two inbounds, and so on. Okay, so for every delivery document, every inbound delivery document in SRM, you'll have a DTR and a freight unit in TM. So let's look now at the end-to-end process once again. So we see that we went through the procurement, we have the planning, how that is divided into stages, we see the procurement of freight, and the submission and execution of events. Let's go quickly now through the process that we already saw. So first of all, we would raise our shopping cart. We would have our shopping cart approved, the PO, and the PO approved. So the process is the same in that sense. It doesn't change much. The only thing that changes is the integration fields. And just so we have a review on that, remember. So shopping cart, we have a contract catalog that we're going to be using to select our product ID. Each product ID that is linked to a contract catalog for a vendor will have a different Incoterm, hence a different price, and a different responsible vendor or freight forwarder depending on the Incoterm attached to that product ID. We also understand that the Incoterms from the contract catalog are not picked up in the shopping cart, but we have to populate these manually. Okay, the Incoterm was selected using a matchbox, but the actual location, whether it's a handover location or destination location, is manually added. We also saw that the purchasing group that we're selecting in the shopping cart will default the planner group in TM, which means who is going to be planning transportation in TM. We saw that there's no freight line for the shopping cart for goods. We are now creating a separate shopping cart for freight. And we also saw that the delivery address in SRM is now the destination location in TM. Okay, and TM will calculate the amount of legs, and legs you'll see that it stands for also freight orders in TM as per the origin and destination of the goods that are supposed to be transported. Origin will be the vendor origin, and the destination will be the delivery address that we added. And finally, the supplier in SRM will allow the supplier to submit events in CCP. So now vendors and freight forwarders have a system called CCP, Carrier Collaboration Portal, which they will use to submit the events as transportation is ongoing. So we'll have at each leg, at each stage, whether it's loading, unloading, departure, arrival, and so on, we'll see how the vendors and freight forwarders have now access to this system to submit events. So the way the system works and the actions that the vendors and freight forwarders perform in CCP are not the responsibility of the actual planners. So they're not the responsibility of the TS01 or TS02. What the TS01 and TS02 do is submit events on their behalf, but in TM, not in CCP. CCP is a system that has been created for the vendors and freight forwarders that will have the role of TS05, which we'll see in a bit. And that role is strictly linked to them, not to, let's say, the planners, which are you guys, the ones who will receive the roles of TS02 and TS01. Okay, so let's move on now to our ECC portion, where we'll see the inbound delivery document and the packing information. So here we go. Our inbound delivery document is created. Okay, we understand that after the PO has been approved. We have to now add the product weight and volume, as it's not maintained in the material master. So the inbound coordinator will and should and must update weight and volume in the inbound delivery document manually based on the information that the suppliers are providing in their packing list. So you're not making up the information of the packing, you're simply telling ECC in the inbound delivery document what packing materials have been used by the vendor and how the goods have been packed according to the vendor information. Okay, we have now several packaging materials that we can use. One of the new ones is this one here, ZPAM, which are available in the system, and the ones we'll be indicating to see how the packaging is performed. We'll see that the packaging materials shall be added manually in the inbound delivery document. And the weight and volume in the packaging information that is updated in the inbound will reflect the correct dimensions in the materials being shipped in TM, and it will create what we call the handling unit. So in TM, we'll be able to see the packaging and the handling unit. So every time we perform the packaging in ECC, we'll have a handling unit that will reflect the packaging information in TM. So, and good news for the future is that at the moment that vendors are onboarded on EDI, which is a system that will link directly the information that vendors are adding in their system with our system, and the packaging details will be automatically derived. So we won't have to worry about that in the near future, but for now we're adding the packaging information manually, as there's no connection between what the vendors are inputting in their system and our own system in Umoja. But once that is the case, we won't have to worry about the packing anymore. Let's see our next stage. So once we have our inbound delivery and we have packed, we have now the DTRs and the freight unit documents that are generated automatically in TM. And what are these documents? So very important information here to keep in mind. So these are the first documents now that will appear in TM. This is the first and newest documents that you guys should pay attention to. This is also very important for the assessment that you'll take on Wednesday. So we have a DTR document and a freight unit document that are generated by Umoja automatically. Once the inbound delivery is created in ECC, the system automatically creates the delivery-based transportation requirement and the freight unit. Okay, the DTR and freight unit are visible in the inbound delivery document by accessing the TM status tab, and it looks like this. So in the inbound delivery document, if we click on the TM status tab, we'll be able to see that our inbound delivery document here is linked to the DTR, which shows here, this DTR number starting with 11, and linked to the freight unit, which is the number starting here with 41. So we see how ECC is displaying the DTR and freight unit in TM already in ECC. So we can access TM and search for our DTRs and freight units by looking at our inbound delivery document or even our PO document as well. And that will display all the linked documents in TM. Okay, it's important to understand that there's a one-to-one relationship, as I was saying before, between the inbound, DTR, and freight unit. So if you have one inbound, you have one DTR, one freight unit. If you have 10 inbounds, you have 10 DTRs, 10 freight units. Okay, so a one-to-one relationship. So each inbound will indicate in TM that there's a requirement for transportation. Okay, so the delivery-based transportation requirement DTR is basically the representation of the inbound delivery document in TM. Also, the freight unit, again, as I mentioned before, and I'm restating this, the freight unit represents a set of goods that are transported together across the entire transportation chain. Okay, so it means exactly what is being transported. The DTR is the requirement for transportation. The freight unit is the set of goods that are transported together. All right, so if it's just like you when you're traveling in a plane and you're traveling with your whole family, you and your whole family would be the freight units, what is being transported together, and the DTR would be the requirement to transport you from, let's say, your country of origin to your destination location. That's the easiest way to think about the freight unit and the DTR and understand the difference between the two. Okay, we also understand that in the freight unit, we'll be able to see information as items, transportation stages, document flow, and status information, which we'll be looking at when we go into the demo, and it'll help you understand what we're talking about. Sorry, so our next portion here is now focused basically on the vendor stage. So for Incoterms like FCA, FOB, DAT, and DAP, we'll have vendor delivered stages. In the cases of DAP, the vendor will be doing all the transportation, worrying about all the transportation. So from our side as TM planners, we won't have to worry about anything as the vendor takes care of everything. We'll plan transportation, we'll perform it, and there's nothing else we will be required to do unless told by the vendors that we should make changes to the transportation. But for DAT, FOB, and FCA Incoterms, we do have to manage some portions that we'll see later on, okay? But for the vendor delivered stages, Umoja automatically creates the legs, which are the freight orders, for each leg, each stage in the transportation proposal. It will also assign the vendor to each leg because we added it to the shopping cart. So in TM, it'll already be there derived, integrated, because we added it into the shopping cart and PO. But again, as I was saying before, the TM planner can manage these legs if necessary, the ones that are supposed to be managed by the goods vendor. When it comes to the goods vendor stage, so let's take a look at the roles, right? We're talking about transportation planners, and we see that we have the TS01, TS02, and TS03. So if we take a look at this screen before, this TM planner, as we're now entering into TM, this TM planner who manages freight orders, is what you have to worry about now according to your new role. Okay, your new roles, and that's why you guys are attending this WebEx session, should either be TS01, TS02, or TS03. There's also roles for TS07, 08, and 09 for STOs, but now we're only focusing on UNOE. The STOs we'll review tomorrow. Basically, TS01s and 02s are those that are being trained now in the missions by our LPEs. And since you guys none of you were sent to Valencia for the workshop, you're receiving this training by one of us, right? One of the trainers here in Valencia. The ones that are supposed to take the assessment and receive our certification are TS01 and 02. TS03s, which only have a display all role, will receive the role nonetheless. Okay, even if you don't take the assessment, even if you don't pass the assessment, you will receive the role nonetheless. But TS01s and 02s are the ones that have transactional impacts in TM. So these WebEx sessions are mainly dedicated for you guys with the roles of TS01 and 02. And now let's understand a bit more of these roles and their impact in TM. So as we see here on screen, we have the TS01, who is the transportation planner, is responsible for planning movement of goods purchased and delivered by vendors. Okay, so this is the main role of the TS01, planning the movement of goods from delivery location to destination. Also, as we'll see later on, it will allow the TS01, will have the option to submit events and unexpected events for the vendors. in DAP, FCA, FOB, and DAT scenarios. Now there's another role, which is the TS02 TM Manage Freight Order role, which are the ones in charge of managing freight orders. And they will be the ones who will amend, update, and enter events in a freight order. Right? We'll see this now, sorry, a bit more in the end-to-end and when we go into the system, the difference between the two. But mainly the TS01 plans transportation and submits events, while the TS02 edits the freight orders, okay, updates them with the freight forwarder information, with the freight PO information, updates the actual charges, the dates, and the locations. The TS03, as the role says, basically displays all information. So we can go into TM and view the documents, but we can't do any transactional actions in TM. Only these two roles can do so. Okay, so before I move on to our next slide here, any questions? If you guys are adding any questions in the Q&A, please do so now. Or if you want to speak up, click on the hand icon. I'm just going to give you guys a minute to do so if you have a question now. Any questions, anyone? No questions, so I'm just moving on with the presentation. Right, I don't see anything in the Q&A either. Remember, click on the hand icon. Okay, so here we go. Continue with the slide now for the goods vendor stage. Okay, so UNOE planning the goods vendor stage. The UNOE scenario, the goods vendor stage, applies to FCA, FOB, DAT, and DAP Incoterms. In these stages, the stages that are related to the goods vendor, it's the goods vendor who's responsible for delivering the items to the agreed location. All right, so basically here, the TM planner wouldn't have to worry about anything. You'll see in the system how the system automatically generates the legs, the stages, or the FOs, which they're all synonyms of each other, in the system for the stages belonging to the vendors. So in a DAP Incoterm scenario, the vendor takes care of everything. But for the others, FCA, FOB, AD, and T, it's a split between vendors and freight forwarders. The vendors will do their own stage, which we don't have to worry about, and then the freight forwarders will come in at a later stage where the TM planners will be involved. We move on now to the system selecting the default route between the vendor location and delivery address. So again, the system does this automatically based on the master data in TM. We'll see how that works when we start planning. We still have another few minutes to go through this presentation, and then we'll go into the system and see how that works. And once the freight orders are created in the system, we can automatically just view them in the system and they're ready for execution, which allows the goods vendor to connect to CCP and submit the related events. Okay, and then here, the last portion where the TM planner would come in is if the automatically created freight orders differ from the vendor's actual route. If that were the case, the TM planners can also recreate and delete the ones that are generated by the system and plan new ones. Okay, so that would basically cover our stage here for the planning related to goods vendor stage. Now let's take a look at the stage of the freight forwarders. So that part where the TM planner would have to come in and now manage and plan the freight units. So basically, as I said at the beginning, the DTRs and freight units are generated in TM. And now for the freight forwarder stages, us as TM planners, TS01, would have to select our freight units, which are the goods being transported, and planning transportation for them using the cockpit. This would generate a proposal in TM. We would select our best proposal. This proposal would calculate the charges based on master data, and again would generate our freight orders, which would be the legs that the freight forwarder would have to follow to finalize the transportation, and then eventually generate the SOW document that we will have to upload to the shopping cart in order to have the solicitation for freight. Okay, so let's see now one by one the impact of the planning of the freight units. So in a UNOE scenario, the freight forwarder stages that apply to XWorks, FCA, FOBA, DAT Incoterms will have to be planned by the TM planner. And this is done as in TM as the freight units appear in the transportation cockpit. We can filter by the freight units depending on the Incoterm, and I'll show you that in a bit. I think it'll be clear in the demo. But basically, the TM planner has an option to select different profiles in order to plan. So instead of having all freight units displayed and mixed at the same time, the TM planner can select different planning profiles depending on the Incoterm, so they can plan each freight unit separately according to the Incoterm that they have to plan. Okay, so again, goods vendor stages and freight forwarder stages. We see here that the freight units with the same pickup and destination locations can be consolidated. So that you guys understand this, you can combine goods that are being transported together. There are times, and that's the main reason behind TM, is that you can combine transportation proposals so that we save on cost. Instead of having one set of goods being transported separately and then another one separately and they're all following the same route, TM allows you to combine these transportation proposals as long as they fall into a 7-day window or time frame, so we can transport goods that are going to the same place together. Even if they're not going to the same place, we can transport them together as long as they fall within the 7-day time frame. We'll see that when we go into the system, and that'll be a lot clearer when you guys see me perform it in the system as well. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide here, where we have our transportation proposals generated and we select our best proposals. So the system displays a set of transportation proposals for the freight units selected, and it displays like such that we'll see in TM. We select our best transportation proposal according to either cost, distance, means of transportation, amount of legs in the transportation, whatever it is we consider better. And basically, we can organize these transportation proposals by number, as you see here, by freight unit, or by the legs or stages of the goods vendor and of the freight forwarder. Right? I believe that when we go into the system, it'll be much easier to follow. At any point, if you have any questions or doubts, stop me by clicking on the hand icon or writing in the Q&A. Okay, and finally, once we've planned our transportation, the system will create our freight orders. The freight orders are the legs in our transportation. So just the same way as you book a flight from, let's say, Valencia to Nairobi, you probably won't travel directly from Valencia to Nairobi, but probably stop somewhere else, whether in Paris, Istanbul, or Amsterdam. So each one of those stops is the equivalent to a freight order in TM. It's a different leg, a different stage. So you may have normally 3 stages, but it could be 4, 5, 6, depending on the transportation route that you select. Just like when you select a flight to travel anywhere, you can have either 1 stopover, 3 stopovers, or none. Okay, so basically the planning of the freight units will generate freight orders, but these freight orders are not assigned transportation yet. So the freight forwarders that you have to assign to them will show up in TM as z_car. Okay, as you saw before, the vendors are automatically linked in TM, but the freight forwarders aren't. That's where the other role, the TIA02, would come in after freight solicitation has been performed to link the freight forwarder to the actual freight order. So each individual leg will be linked to a freight forwarder. Either one freight forwarder transports everything together, or we can assign a different freight forwarder to each one of those legs, depending on what is convenient for us or depending on the contracts we have with each freight forwarder. Okay, the system will calculate the charges automatically, even though these charges can then be updated once we have the freight PO. Right, so we now see that we have a statement of work. So the document that is generated after our freight orders are created in TM is the SOW, the statement of work, that can be downloaded from each freight forwarder, can be printed and edited, and it should be attached then to the freight shopping cart for the freight procurement process. This SOW will have the information of the inbound delivery document, the PO, the stages that the freight forwarder that we're soliciting freight for will have to manage, as well as the charges and the packing information that we also talked about at the beginning of the session. Okay, so we have the freight orders related to the shipment that we see here. As you can see on the screenshot, we also have the POs, and we have the inbound delivery document and each one of the legs that they're responsible for. So the SOW looks like such here below. We'll take a look at it now in the system as well. Again, I see no questions. I see nobody raising their hand to speak up, so I'm just moving on. At any point, feel free to stop me. Okay, so we discussed that once we have our SOW document, and again, this is only linked to the freight forwarder stage. You realize that for the goods vendor stage, we are not managing anything unless solicited by the goods vendor to do so. But for the freight forwarder stage, we do have to plan transportation, and once we have an SOW, we will attach that to the freight shopping cart. This one will get approved. So this process is exactly the same as it occurs now. The solicitation will go on, which will happen offline, and once we have a response, we'll have a PO for freight, and that PO for freight will be approved. Okay, so the process for the freight solicitation is just as you do now. The only thing is we would have to attach the SOW document. Okay, the steps remain similar, as you can see here, and we can also see that they are requested in a separate shopping cart. That's what I was saying at the beginning of the actual WebEx session. Okay, so the SOW should be attached. There should be a separate shopping cart for freight, and that will take us to our next stage. So once the freight PO has been awarded, okay, so now we're going back to TM, and once our freight PO has been awarded, we are now back in TM, and we are now switching roles. So far we were doing the TM planner role. We were looking at the TM planner role, which was the TS01 for the planning stage. And now for the procurement freight stage in TM, we're looking at the TS02. The TS02 will be responsible for two main actions. First one, assigning the carrier that we have just solicited for in the shopping cart here, and also assigning the carrier and the freight PO to each of the legs that were generated in the transportation proposal here in the planning stage. Okay, so we would have to go back to each freight order and assign a carrier and a freight PO. The next action the TS02 would have to perform is editing these FOs with the actual routes, dates, and charges that were given to us by now the solicitation process. So now we have the accurate information, how much it's going to cost us to transport according to the freight forwarder we selected, the dates that this will be transported, and the actual route that the freight forwarder is taking for transportation. So basically the role of the TS02 is this one here: assign carrier, assign freight PO, and edit the routes, dates, and charges. Let's take a look at the details of these actions. Okay, I'm taking a look at the questions, and no one is raising their hand either. I'm also checking to see in the meantime if any new person has registered to the session. I know some people have done it quite late, but I've approved them. So far we have 15 attendees. Okay, not bad. So back to our presentation here. So once the freight services have been awarded, the freight order in TM has to be updated with the selected carrier and purchase order number. So this is, as I was saying before, you assign the carrier, and this will make the freight orders ready for execution, which means that the freight forwarders now, since they're assigned to each one of those legs, will be able to submit events in CCP for those legs. Okay, the freight orders need to be updated with the actual route, date, and charges, as I was saying before. Okay, so basically the role of the TS02 are the ones displayed here. Assign the carrier and freight PO and update route, dates, and charges according to the indications of the freight forwarder. Okay, that'll lead us to the last step in the end-to-end process for TM, for UNOE and TM, which is the execution and monitoring of events. It's very important to separate CCP and TM here. So we have the goods vendor stage, so the part of the vendor, the ones related to the Incoterms that we saw here, FCA, FOB, DAT, and DAP. The vendor will be responsible to submit these events in CCP. So they will be responsible for updating events and uploading any attachments or adding any notes related to these events. But now in TM, the TS01, so we're back to the actual planner, the same one who was performing the planning here at the beginning, different from the TS02 performing here the assignment of carrier and so on, will be responsible to update events in TM if the vendor is not doing so in CCP. Okay, so the TS01 will update events in TM, but not in CCP. But now, CCP and TM communicate with each other. They're systems that talk to each other. So if I, as a vendor, submit events in CCP, the TM planner in TM will be able to see those events. If the TM planner updates events or uploads attachments in TM, these will be reflected in CCP. Okay, and that's also explained here in the next slide. So all the information I was just talking about, the vendors responsible in CCP for the events. So we'll have a set of events that are called planned events. So these are events that will be displayed automatically in CCP and in TM because they are planned. All we have to do is ensure that we submit them if they've been performed according to the date and time that we said they would be performed. Or we also have unexpected events, which are events that we didn't plan for. And these will not be visible in CCP. We'll have to select them and submit them. The same thing in TM. These are events like delayed and damage. Okay, we can also add attachments like packing list, bill of lading, proof of delivery, etc. Each one of these events, the planned events, only some of them, like for example departure and arrival, the ones that are critical, will automatically notify the TM planner in TM that these events have been submitted. For others not that critical, like loading start or loading end, there won't be any automatic notifications. But all those that are unexpected will send an automatic notification to the TM planner. So we can view those in TM as well. Okay, so anything we attach via CCP or perform via CCP will be reflected in TM. But in cases vendor cannot connect to CCP and submit events, the TS01 will be able to go into TM and submit events for them. And these will be displayed in CCP. Okay, once those events are submitted and finalized, the freight order cannot be, let's say, backtracked. The freight order now is in process and execution, as it says here, and you won't be able to backtrack. All right, so that takes us to the next slide, which is basically the same exact information, but now from the freight forwarder stage. So just the same as the vendor will submit events in CCP, the freight forwarder will submit their portion of the events in CCP for the legs that they're responsible for. And again, as we see here, they can update events, upload attachments in CCP, and the TM planner can do so in TM for them as well, if they cannot do so. Okay, so basically this slide is the same as the one we saw before, but with the information of the freight forwarder. So once freight forwarders are assigned to a freight order, they can log into CCP and submit events. They can also add attachments, and in cases where they don't or cannot connect to CCP, the TS01 planner will submit events for them. And once the first event is submitted, the freight order is in execution, and now we cannot backtrack. No changes in the route are further allowed. Okay, we also have our documents in ECC, and that will take us to the end of this portion of the presentation. So now I'm going to go into the system and show you guys TM as a demo. All right, but before I do that, any questions while I set up? So remember, after this session, I'm going to send you guys an email with some practice exercises. Okay, the credentials page looks like this one, like the one you see here on screen. This specific one, while I'm logging into Umoja on the side here, this specific cover page is an extra that I made for myself so I can log in and show you guys a demo. But this is how it works. You guys will receive one. For example, let me look at one with a name. So this one is personalized for this person here. Each one of you will receive a personalized cover page with login information. So you have the login information for the TS01, same for the TS02, and the user IDs and passwords. You'll also see the purchase order documents and the inbound delivery documents that you guys can search for in TM and submit events for, generate transportation proposals, and so on. Okay, so you guys will follow this credential page the same way I'm going to follow it now. So I'm going to use this extra as if I were one of you performing the exercise from home later on. So I'm logging into the system here. I'm putting Umoja here on screen. What you guys would do, and remember, this is going to be recorded so you guys can follow the steps later on at home. We have the training system, and we'll be selecting the T5T here from training system, T5T, double click. That'll launch our next screen here where we have to add our username and our password. So the username we're adding here is the one in your cover page. We select this one. In this case, I'm just going to copy and paste. So go here, and now we add our password, which is the Umoja123. Okay. And here you go. You log into the system. You click on Launch NWBC. This will launch the following page. Again, you click on NWBC. Once again, this is the training environment. In production, there's only one click to go. Let me maximize this screen a bit more so you guys can see a bit better the tabs. Okay, so basically now we're in TM, and this is your start page where we have ERP logistics integration, freight order management, and planning. The first tab we're going to be looking at is the ERP logistics integration, where we're going to be going to search for our DTRs. Okay, so remember, the first thing we're looking at here is we're searching for our DTRs, which are the transportation requirements. And to do so, we click on the Overview Transportation Requirements. Click on that. And here we'd be able to, this looks a lot like SRM for those of you who are familiar with it, also a lot like ECC. So the search page works practically the same way. We have a set of fields that we can add information to. And then when we click on apply here at the bottom, we'll have our results, which are DTR documents, linked to our inbound delivery documents as well. So we can do it, the easy way is to simply go to the fields for original delivery, and there we'll have our inbound delivery document, or we can go to original order, down here, where we can add our PO. So if we go back to our cover page, we can select our PO number or our inbound delivery number, whichever one we want to search by, and that should display in TM the exact, so make sure that you're adding it to the right one. So in this case, I'm selecting the purchase order, so I'm going to the original order. I'm pasting that information here, and I'm clicking on apply, and that should display my DTR. See how the number just changed? And this DTR should be available for me to plan. This means that I have a requirement to plan some sort of goods to be transported, okay? So this is how it works, okay? You can either search by your PO, in this case, as I did here, or we can search by our inbound if you want to, in this case. So I can delete this PO, go to my original delivery, and now add the inbound. Remember, inbound, original delivery, PO, original order. Scroll down, click on apply, and that should display the DTR, the same exact one. Okay, you have more options if you click on the change query to select other search options, but we're just going to stick to this one for the sake of time. And once you have that, you can simply click on the DTR number here. And the way TM works is that every time you click on a hyperlink like this one, it'll display a new window. Okay, so I'm dragging this window here. And now we have the window with the actual document flow tab and other tabs related to your DTR. So you have your DTR document. You can see here at the top, it says display DTR for UNOE, link to the inbound delivery document, such and such. The tab called document flow is the one that's going to display all the documents that are linked to this DTR. So in this case, I'm looking at the DTR. It tells me that I have this inbound and this freight unit. Remember that the freight unit and DTR are automatically generated, one-to-one relationship. So if I have one inbound, I have one DTR, one freight unit. And if you guys look at below the freight unit, you have two different freight orders. And you can see here to the left, it says UNOE vendor delivered freight order. So you have one and you have two. So two different freight orders that are already automatically generated by the system. So if you remember what I was saying at the beginning, when you have Incoterms such as FCA, DAT, DAP, or FOB, the system will automatically generate freight orders, which are some of the legs in the transportation proposal that are vendor managed. You don't have to worry about these as the system generates them automatically and they're linked to the vendors. The ones you have to worry about as a TM planner are the ones that are linked to the freight forwarder. Now, to understand the type of Incoterm linked to this planning, to this freight unit and these legs, you go here to the General Data tab. If I click on the General Data tab, what I can see now is specific information related to this delivery requirement. This information that you see here was added in the shopping cart and has had an automatic impact in TM. If you look at the Incoterms here, Incoterm section, we have the FCA Incoterm. Okay, so we know that the handover location is Dubai Port, FCA Incoterm. So that's why the system has already automatically generated two freight orders. If we go back to the document flow, we see that two of the legs were already planned by the system because it's an FCA scenario, which means that the legs from the vendor to the handover location have already been planned by the system. The only thing we have to plan now is from handover location to the mission. We can also see in the Business Partner tab the shipper information. So Caterpillar is the vendor in charge of transporting, and the consignee where it's going. So in this case, it's going to mission in Israel. So we have the UN office here. We can expand this. Okay. UN office special coordination for peace in Israel. So you have that information. As I was saying at the beginning, the consignee information, which has been added here from the delivery address that we added in the shopping cart. You can also take a look at the locations, dates, and times tab, which will show you from where to where this transportation is going. So as you see, the freight orders that we looked at before are not going directly to the final destination. They're only going to the handover location because they're FCA Incoterms. So we have to continue the planning. Before I do that, I'm going to go back to the Document Flow tab, and I'm going to show you that you can navigate through all the documents that you see here. So right now we're viewing the DTR. We see the inbound, we see the freight unit and freight orders. So let's click on the freight unit. If I click on the freight unit, and again, it's going to launch another window. You see now at the top, I'm displaying the freight unit now, and the freight unit is leading the document. Here I also have a set of tabs that are very important for me to look at. One of the ones that I care about the most in my freight unit document is here. If we go to the folder, because not all tabs are displayed at once, here you have more tabs in the folder. You can go to Stages, and in the Stages tab, what we can see is the stages that have been planned already and the stages that the system believes that are missing. So in this case, we have 2 stages that are already planned, and those are the 2 freight orders that are already planned for the vendor. And that's stage 1, which tells us that we're going from, and I'll leave this here, see it, that we're going from the city source, Belfast, to the destination location, Belfast Port. Okay, so that's one of our legs. And then we have our second leg here, which is Belfast Port to Dubai Port, if you can see it a little better. You can also drag some of these columns so you can put them together, so you can manipulate this information and see source location, destination location. So our first stage, our first freight order that is already planned is this one, and it goes from our vendor, Caterpillar, to Belfast Port. Our second stage already planned by sea, as you can see here, transportation mode, is going from Belfast Port to Dubai Port, and the one that is missing, according to the system, is one single stage, which is going from Dubai Port to the final destination. But you see it doesn't have a means of transportation, so it's not been planned yet. And if we scroll to the right, we can see also towards the end that we don't have a carrier. We have the carrier for the vendor, but we have nothing planned for the last stage. We can also go directly to the freight orders for the vendor delivered stages, but we can't see anything related to the freight forwarder stage because it hasn't been planned yet. So the way to plan this would be the following. So now that we have the information and we have our freight unit, we see that our freight unit is the one for 41402104. We see that freight unit. We can do 2 things. We can close these windows now that we don't need them, and that'll take us right to our main screen again, the one we looked at before, under the ERP Logistic Integration tab. We can click on Planning, okay? So Planning is going to take us directly to this Transportation Cockpit hyperlink where we can plan transportation. All right, so we can click on that, and this will also open a new window. And this window, as we saw before very briefly in the presentation, is the planning profile. So what is this screen exactly? This screen allows us to filter our results later on in the cockpit. So what we're doing here is we're adding a planning profile. We're telling the system that we want to search for freight units for a specific Incoterm. Okay, and how do we do that? So let's say I want to only search for Incoterms that are FCA, DAT, or FOB, because those are the ones that are always split between vendors and freight forwarders. They have a planning profile of their own. Then XWorks has its own planning profile. DAP has its own planning profile as well. So how do we set one of those up? We click on New, first thing, and you see we have a brand new line here. The first column we have to populate is the one for planning profile. Here, clicking on the matchbox, we'll have options to select from. The one we want is the ZPLN UNOE. Okay, let me go there again because that was quite quick. We have 3 options. We have the one for vendor. We're not interested in that one. Or the vendor delivered here. So one would be for the vendor and the other one would be for the dummy vendor, which is the freight forwarder. What we're interested in is those that as a TM planner I have to plan. So I select the UNOE option. That displays here. And then I move over to my freight unit column and I select from the matchbox and you'll see here a set of options. Some of them are not that clear. I'm going to send you guys by email the explanation on each one of these to know which ones to select. To select the one related to FCA, DAT, and FOB, you have to select this one here, the UNOE forwarder delivered. So let me go back to that matchbox and show you. The forwarder delivered stage is the one for the FCA, DAT, and FOB. XWorks is easy because it displays here, and the other options we're not going to be looking at right now. So we're basically just navigating through these two. So I'm selecting the forwarder delivered, and if you want, you can add a description here and say, you know what, this is going to be my UNOE scenario for FCA, DAT, and FOB. So I can save that, and now I know that I'll always have, when I need to find my Incoterms for FCA, FOB, or DAT, all I have to do is click on this line, and that'll take me directly to the transportation cockpit with that freight unit that I'm interested in planning. So right now, you select the line. You see how you can select several of them. Or you can click on here. This, let me just maximize this a bit. This default set, if I click on this matchbox here, that means that I'm making this one my default set. So every time I go to the transportation cockpit, I'm going to go directly to this one. If I uncheck it, I'm going to have to come to the planning profile each time and set it up. If I just click here, it's going to go directly to this planning profile. So once it's selected, I can click on Save now that I've added this check mark and go to Continue. That should take me to the cockpit and show me all freight units that have to be planned. Here you go. So this is what's known as the transportation cockpit. Okay, let me just close this window. And here we go. We have our transportation cockpit, and you see in this box here where it says freight unit stages, all the freight units that we have to plan are there. Cockpit is divided into 4 sections, one for freight unit here, one for the freight orders once we have planned. The one to the bottom left we're not really using for this phase, so we're going to ignore this one. And then we have another section here which we can use for the map, which is a very useful option that I can show you in a bit. So the first thing we have to do is search for the freight unit that we have to plan. Of course, I could just click on the first one I see and plan it, but that wouldn't belong to me, or that wouldn't be the one I need to plan so far. So to search for it, we can either do it in several ways. We can click on the column and custom filter, and we can search for it, or we can go to the field here and add our number directly, which would be the 412342104. And if that is correct, and I click on Enter, my freight unit should display here in a highlighted yellow. So this is the one I'm looking for, and that's the one I want to display and plan. The other way to make it easier for you, of course, would also be, let's say I'm taking this number out, but before I do that, I'm going to copy it. And I'm going freight unit, and I'm going to custom filter. It'll tell me, okay, what freight unit do you want to look for? And I'm going to say freight unit is this one. Clicking on it, clicking on OK, and now all others should disappear, and I just have that one. So it makes it easier, and there's less confusion when you're trying to plan. Okay, so now we know that that's the one we're planning, and if you guys take a look at some of the info here, you see that we're planning from Dubai port to our unloading location, which is our final destination, and we also have the dates here, our earliest delivery date and our latest delivery date. So the date that we added in the shopping cart as delivery date is this one, December 9th. So there's a margin of 7 days as our last delivery date. There's no other freight unit here that we can combine because I don't want to make it that complicated for you guys. But if there were other freight units that we want to combine together with this one, we could as well. Right now, we're just going to plan this freight unit. Now, any questions up to here before I start planning? Let me know if you have any questions before I move on. with the planning profile, with the DTR, with the way I navigated through the system, now would be the proper time to ask a question. Okay, I see all of you are paying attention to what's going on, but no one's asking questions, so I'm taking it quite clear. So I'm just going to move on because we are short on time. Okay, so as I said, now we're planning. So I'm going to select this freight unit to plan. And once it's selected, I go to Transportation Proposals. I click on that, and the system is going to take me to the 20, let's say the system limits the transportation proposals to 20 of them. Okay, it doesn't display more unless you tell it to. So you have more transportation proposals, but the system is defaulted to show only 20. So this is what the proposals look like. Okay, if you scroll down here, you see that we should have at least up to 20 if we go all the way to the bottom. And it doesn't display more because I haven't told it to display more. So 20 is the maximum. Already 20 is enough to look through. Scroll back up again. Both of these. Here, we're back at the top. How does this work? So we can define the filter here to see only transportation proposals based on something we're interested in finding. So for example, I can define a filter and tell the system, you know what, I only want to see the means of transportation. Okay, so we would have to select whatever we want to filter by, whether it's means of transportation or anything else. We would select what means of transportation we want to look, so we can say contains, and we can say here I only want to see anything transported by sea, anything transported by air, and then you'd click on OK, and that will filter your results based on means of transportation that you want to look at. Any other filter, you can either keep this one, delete it, or you can add a new filter and set your new filter. Let's say, for example, I only want to look at the transportations that are going to cost me, for example, and a specific cost. So in this case, we can say is and add a specific cost, and that will filter the options that we see later on in this final result here. Okay, remember, you can scroll down here and move over to your right. You can see further information related to the cost of this transportation, the duration of it, also the loading and unloading time, and other type of details that you can filter by and say, okay, if I want to see only the ones that are going to cost me more or less first, see the most expensive ones, my transportation proposal now, the first one is 14. If I want to see the cheapest first, just filter by the column that you want to filter by, and you see the cheapest first. Okay, the cheapest one would be my transportation proposal 9. Let's go now and see to the left some more details. Let me go all the way up here. And now we see that transportation proposal 9, which is the one I selected because it's the one that was the cheapest, is displayed as such. It tells me transportation proposal 9 for this freight unit has 1, 2, 3, and 4 stages, which means 4 legs, which means 4 freight orders. If you guys take a look at stage 3 and 4, you see that stage 3 and 4 have a yellow envelope with a green check mark. These two have already been planned. Okay, sorry, these two are the ones that have to be planned. Sorry for my mistake. The 1 and the 2, the one that do not have the envelope and the green check mark, are the ones that the system automatically planned for the vendor. Okay, so envelope with green check mark are the ones that need to be planned, and the ones that do not show here with an envelope are the ones that have already been planned for you. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, so back to that. Sorry, just had a quick interruption there. So if you want to select this proposal, all you have to do is click on the check mark here. And this check mark will tell the system that you're selecting this transportation proposal. And the legs that are missing to be planned are the ones that you're going to be planning for. So let's take a look and let's see that, as I said before, the ones without the envelope here from origin to Belfast, Belfast to Dubai are the ones that were planned for the vendor. And the next two from Dubai to Ashwood Port to final destination will be the ones that we're planning for. So we're planning 2 different stages. So I should have a total of 2 different freight orders, okay, that we're going to be planning for. Not 4 of them. I'm only going to see 2 of them. Okay, the first 2 have already been planned. So now that I've selected this checkbox here, I can accept planning. Okay, not accept route. We're accepting planning because that means we're accepting the whole plan. Route is a different story. To give you guys a quick information on that, when you accept the route, what you're accepting is each one of these stages individually, not the whole plan as one. Okay, what I want you guys to learn basically right now is the acceptance of the planning, because that's what your role will entail so far. We click on accept planning, and that will take us back to our cockpit. You see, and it divides your freight units in the amount of stages that we were planning for. Remember the Ashwood Port to, Dubai Port to Ashwood Port and Ashwood Port to final destination? Well, these are the 2 legs that need to be planned now. All right, nothing will happen unless you save. Okay, so right now the system is just telling you this is what you're doing, but nothing has been saved, so nothing has been done. If you realize here, the freight order section, let me get this out of the way. The freight order section here displays 2 legs, but it displays it with a sort of code here with a $sign 2425. Unless you see a number starting with 61, that means you haven't planned anything yet. This is just a proposal. So if I click on save, now these numbers will change and we'll have a 61-digit number. Now these freight orders are planned. So our planning for the complete transportation is now done. We have 2 stages from the vendor, 2 stages from the freight forwarder. All right, and now we're going to see what that looks like going back to our DTR document, the one that we were searching for at the beginning. We only had 2 stages from the vendor. Now we should have 4 stages, 2 from the vendor, 2 from the freight forwarder. Right, so we have that. We can close the cockpit and look for our DTR again. And now we can see that we'll have 4 freight orders. So let's just close the cockpit now. Any questions in the meantime? I don't see anything in the Q&A. Okay, so I see a hand raised here. Maria, was that you?
Hello, can you hear me now, Brian?
Yes, perfectly.
Ah, very good. If we select one of these transportation proposals, we accept it, and then something changes in the meantime, and we have to select another one. Can we go backwards? Can we
Yes,
go back
so
and select another one?
exactly. So in this case, what I did is I already accepted, right? I saved the plan. So
And
that means that my
it.
freight orders were already generated because I was happy with them. Now, if you're unhappy with them, what you would do is you would go back to the transportation proposal section. So let's say, for example, here, I'm going to do it again quickly with another one, okay? Just so you see that, because that's an excellent question too. So I'm going to go back to see the planning profile here again. I'm clicking on continue. I'm going back to the cockpit. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to attempt to plan transportation, but I'm going to reject it, right, instead of accepting it, okay? So I'm going to look at this guy here, the first one I'm finding, and I'm going to go to proposals. And now it's going to generate the proposals again. I'm going to select the very first one I see, just so that you guys can see the same thing I saw before. But now instead of saving, I'm going to reject it and plan again, right? Because that's what you're asking me, right, Maria?
Yeah, but if you accepted it already, you can't go back again, or no?
If you
If
accepted it
it
already,
keeps
you can. Well, you can. Yes, I'll show you right now. So
okay.
this would be without saving. Okay, so imagine I select this proposal, I click on OK, and the system shows me that leg, and I say, oh, you know what? I don't want it. Okay, so basically all you have to do is make sure you select the line, right, that you're planning for. See the one with the green check mark? In this case, we only have one leg, so the freight unit is still just one freight unit. And the one before, if you realize, the freight unit was divided into the amount of legs that showed up
Oh,
here
yeah.
in the freight order. So you have to select them all. Imagine you had 4 stages
Yeah.
here. You would have to select your 4 stages of the freight unit. In this case, I won't because you only have one, and the other ones are different. And the one I did before, you had 2 different ones. So you would have to select as many freight units as stages you have here, but of course for the same freight unit. So imagine that this one is only 1598, and it's divided 4 times. I would have to select that 1598 the 4 times and go back to my proposal plan here. Okay, so for example, oh, I just minimized the screen. So I'm going to go and do it only for the one. All you have to do is simply go back here. Since I didn't accept, you still have the code here, not the 6-1. You can just go back, and that's it. The system takes you back to the proposals, and you plan again. All right? You can
Okay.
also delete this proposal if you don't want it here. You can always delete this here.
Okay, but if you see the 6-1, then you
Uh-huh.
cannot do anything. You go. But if you accepted it and the 6-1 document is created,
Uh-huh. Yes.
then you
Now,
cannot.
here, I'm going to do that one again to show you, okay? But to do that, we need to do the following. So let's say you have already planned them and accepted them, right? Let me go back to the planning profile because this is important. Let's see where it is, profile selection. I can go back to my planning profile screen. And what you have to do, and this you can do right from the beginning if you want. It's just a bit more confusing in the long run. You see where it says freight order section profile here? In this one, I would have to add the profile for the FCA, the same one I added under the freight unit. I put this one. Here, I would have to put the same one. I can save. And why I'm doing this is so that when I go back to the cockpit, now all my planned freight orders should display here. See? All the ones that I have ever planned under this planning profile are displayed. You see how they all have the 6-1
Yeah.
number? So what you would do is you would search for the one that you just planned and select it. Let me get this X out of the way. Select the ones that you just planned, and you can delete them.
Okay.
Okay, and that would erase your freight orders that you already planned and saved, and then you just go back to your proposals and go back to transportation proposals and start over. But you would have to delete them
Okay.
from the cockpit.
All right. That's good.
And that's the way to see these freight orders is like that. You go back to the planning profile, and you can do this right from the beginning. The only problem is that then you're going to have a very crowded freight order section as well. You add this planning profile here too, and you have it. If I remove this, see, and I click on Save, and I click on Continue, my freight order section is empty. You only see the ones you haven't planned yet. If you want to see the ones you planned already, you go back, you add the planning profile for the freight orders, and now you will see the ones here. You save, you click on Continue, and now you see all the ones you have planned. Okay? And if I plan new ones, they will display too, but you're going to have to search for them. And they will be the ones with the $sign and the other numbers. They can't have a 6-1. That's why I didn't add it at the beginning, because it's confusing to have all this information here on this screen. All right?
Okay.
But that was a great question. Okay? Any other questions
Thank you.
before we move on? I'm going to mute you again. Okay, Maria?
Thank you, Brian.
Any question from anyone else? All right, so I'm going to go now back to the search screen for my DTR, so I can close the cockpit. And remember, when you're searching for DTRs, ERP Logistic Integration, we search here by transportation requirement. Now that we have the freight orders, we can also go to the freight order management and search for freight orders directly if we want to, also based on the inbound delivery document. So if I click on the freight orders here, now only looking for the freight orders that I already generated, the search page looks exactly the same. So let's say I can make sure you delete any information that is there from anyone else because you guys are sharing credentials, and make sure that we add our inbound delivery document in the search page, and then we can see our freight orders. Now, to search for it here, if you see, you have either directly the freight order document that you can add, or let's look for the inbound delivery document. To look for the inbound delivery document, what you have to do is go to the change query, because that will display more options. Make sure that you erase all the data that is there and scroll down. You see how many more fields we have now that I clicked on the change query option. If you go all the way to the bottom, we have here UNOE scenario, PO, STO, ECC delivery. So here, if you go back to your credentials page, the one that I was talking about at the beginning, you can copy your inbound delivery document, and here you can add your ECC inbound delivery document. You can click on apply, and we should see all the freight orders that belong to that inbound. You see 1, 2, 3, and 4. We see that 2 of them are vendor delivered, Caterpillar, and the other 2, the ones that we just planned now, are dummy carrier because they haven't been assigned a carrier yet. But you realize how easily that works. Based on your inbound delivery or your PO, adding that information under the Freight Order Management tab, going to the Change Query option here, we add our inbound, we click on Apply, and now we have all the freight orders that are linked to that inbound delivery document. Okay, so that would be the end of our first stage, the planning stage. All right, then we would have to go into the assignment of carrier and freight PO, as well as we can update the charges and dates, and maybe we can go through that. Then again, remember tomorrow, the steps that we're going to go through in the system are very similar, if not identical, to the ones we're doing now. So tomorrow we're just going to be reviewing the same thing. So tomorrow, today I can't cover some of the aspects of TM, tomorrow I'll cover them, okay, in the time we have. Right now we still have another 5 minutes. Now I can extend the session another 10-15 minutes if you guys are willing to stay, so we can at least go through the process of assigning the carrier, assigning the freight PO, and editing the dates, charges, and locations. All right? So if we go back to our PowerPoint, if you guys remember the PowerPoint here, I'm going to put this on screen. If you guys remember this end-to-end, right now, this part was already done by the system. What we did is we did the planning, and we had to spend some time there because there was a lot to do depending on if you were planning for the vendor or the freight forwarder. What we have to do now, as you can see, we already went and selected the proposal from the cockpit, and now we have our freight orders and our SOW documents. What would come now is the freight procurement stage. We're not going to go into SRM to raise this shopping cart because the process is exactly the same. What we're going to do now is log in as the TMFO manager, the TS02, and assign carrier and freight PO, as well as update routes, dates, and charges. Okay, so I'm going back to TM, and so we understand where we are at this point here, is that all the documents and all the transportation proposals are already there in TM. I can access any of my documents. So for example, if I'm going back here, if I click on this freight order, remember any hyperlink you can navigate to in TM. This freight order, see, now I'm looking at the planned freight order. In the document flow tab, which I'm going to look for it here. We have the freight order, and it's linked to this freight unit, and it's linked to this DTR and this inbound. Remember we saw this before, but we used to see all the freight orders linked to the DTR. If I click on the DTR, it opens a new window, and now you see DTR, inbound, freight unit, and the 4 freight orders linked to these documents. In the screen that I was showing you before, which is the one I'm displaying here, at the top, the freight order, all you see is one freight order, and it's linked to the freight unit and DTR. If you look at the DTR document, you see that freight unit and all the freight orders linked to it. So you can either go one by one freight order, or you can see all the documents linked to each other. If you look at the freight unit, and that opens another window. You look at the freight unit here, you see under the Stages tab, then now we have 4 stages. 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember before we only had 2 planned and 1 third one? Now we automatically planned all the other ones. So now we have the 4 stages here by source and destination. And if we scroll all the way to the right, we see that 2 of them are vendor delivered and 2 are freight forwarder delivered. Right? And we see that the freight forwarder delivered ones stand as Z-dummy. Okay, so that's clear up to here. Now what we would have to do is log out from TM as the TS01 and log back in as the TS02, because now we're going to be editing the freight orders. Okay, so just give me a second while I log out and back in. And if you have any questions, now's the time to. Just bear with me for a second. All right, so here we go. And let me see if I can find the correct one. Okay. Okay. All right, so I'm logging in as the TS02. Again, following the process there. If I know you guys, the time is up, but if you don't mind staying for another 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, I can continue to show you guys this. Okay, so as you realize now that I'm logged in as the TS02, we have now only 2 tabs instead of just 1, right? We have one for freight order management and the other one for searching for DTRs. So we have the one that searches for DTRs and the one that searches for freight orders. So the one we don't have now, the tab that disappeared, is the one for TS01 for planning, because the TS02 can't plan, right? If we look at the PowerPoint I was showing before, TS02 only does this portion in TM. The planning and the event management is done by the TS01. Okay, so we go back to our screen here, and now we're going to look for the freight orders based on the inbound delivery document. Again, I'm displaying my quick criteria maintenance. I'm deleting all the info. I'm going to the change query option because what I want to do is search for my inbound all the way at the bottom. Here is where I should add my inbound delivery document number. Okay, So I should be finding it according to this information here. So 65, and that should display that inbound delivery document number here. That should display all my freight orders. Okay. I was being told by a colleague that we may have some issue with the user. Let me just make sure that everything is correct here, and that I 65, and there it is. Okay, perfect. So no problem. All right, so now we see that the freight orders display linked to this user, and we have the dummy carrier and also the vendor delivered leg here. So now to assign a carrier, we're only assigning carriers to the ones that say dummy carrier because the other ones are vendor delivered, so we don't have to worry about those. The only ones we should be assigning to are the ones that have the dummy carrier information here. And how do we do that? We select the line that we have a freight order for, and we go to subcontracting. Now, you can add a different freight forwarder to each one of the legs, or you can add a freight forwarder to all the legs together. Okay, this way you could add them to each one. If you select just one, you can add a freight forwarder to the one leg. If you added both, and let's say imagine you have 5 or 6 freight orders, you could select them all, click on subcontracting, and then assign carrier and SRM freight PO and just manage that. Or you can do it one by simply selecting one line at a time, going to subcontracting, assigning a carrier, and now the next window will display where it tells you to add the carrier and the freight PO. This information should also be in your cover page. So according to the cover page that I'm using, which was the one for extra 1 here, we would be adding the purchase order for freight information here, or the carrier BP. Okay, so we select the carrier information, go back to TM, we add our carrier information here, and that will tell you that this is the carrier that you're selecting, and then we add the freight PO here, which is this number. Actually, the freight PO number can be anything because SRM is not integrated with TM. So anything we do after the shopping cart for goods won't be integrated in TM directly. So you see I have my freight PO number and my carrier here. I click on OK. And now you'll realize that if it doesn't change automatically here for ZDummy, all you have to do is refresh. So I'm going to refresh my screen here. And this dummy carrier should change now to Scan Global Logistics. See? So what that means now is that I have my freight order, so my leg, the one that didn't have a freight forwarder linked to it, the one that I was planning before 5 minutes ago, now has an actual carrier assigned to it. Well, the other one already had a Caterpillar assigned to it. Now this one has the Scan Global Logistics. So now what does that mean? That means that the vendor, Caterpillar, and the freight forwarder or carrier, Scan Global, can both go into CCP and submit events for these specific legs. If I hadn't done what I just did now, only Caterpillar would be able to log into CCP and submit events, but the carrier, Scan Global Logistics, would not be able to see the freight orders assigned to them in CCP. Now that I have assigned them, they can both start submitting events. Okay, the next thing would be to go to the individual freight order, and when that screen displays, here is where I would be performing the other tasks that a TS02 has to perform, which is the editing of freight orders with routes, dates, and charges. Okay, so now that you're in that freight order that you just assigned the carrier to, you have several tabs that are important here. One would be the one for, as we see here, sorry, let me just go to the charges tab. The charges tab is the one that will display the estimated charges for this transportation and where you would have to add the actual charges. So in this case, if we go down to the item, you see how it displays the estimated charges, which in this case we should have some already. But since the packing was not performed for this specific freight unit, there are no estimated charges in this case because there's nothing to calculate by. Okay, there's no gross volume, nothing. That's why it's so important for the packaging details to be added. So like this, we can have our estimated charges here. Without them, we don't have estimated charges. Without estimated charges, in the long run, TM cannot cross-reference the market prices, so the actual charges, with the estimated ones, and become a smarter system. So in the long run, our master data can be more accurate. That's why it's important that the packaging is done. Okay, if we click on Edit, that will display some blank fields where we can go to the actual charge line and add our actual charge information. Let's say it's $165 US. When you click on OK, that will update the final total amount. So if we have our estimated charges, which should have been, let's say 100, I don't think I can add them now because we don't have the packaging done. The actual charges will cross-reference with that, and in the long run, in a year time or more, we can have more accurate data in our master data in TM. Now, if you see this checkbox here, ignore calculation. If we add this calculation, what we're doing is we're multiplying this value per gross volume. But in this case, since we didn't do the packaging, we're not seeing that reflected. If you want to add the actual complete and total gross volume, you can always just click on ignore calculation and add the full price directly in the actual amount. If you want to add it freight order by freight order, you do it by unchecking the ignore calculation checkbox. And that would be how you add the actual charges in the freight order. Okay, you simply click on edit, unfold the product ID here, go to the actual charge and add your price here. Once that is done, you can always click on save and the actual price will remain. The other thing we have to edit are the locations and dates, and that will be the last thing we cover in this WebEx. Tomorrow we can do a review of that and we'll look at the submission of events. Okay, so to do that, how do we edit the stages? How do we edit the dates? So again, if you look at here, stages, in this tab, what we have is the actual stage for this specific freight order. Okay, so we have our source location and destination location. All right, and the same thing with the dates. Planned departure date, and then if we scroll over further, we have the planned arrival date. And these are all fields that can be edited. Now, one thing that is very important, remember that you have specific stages. In TM, if you want to edit a specific stage, you should always edit the one of the handover location stage, the main stage, okay, the one that will eventually affect the transportation by either air or sea. The one done by truck, which are the pre or the on stages, those will be automatically updated once you've changed the main stage. Okay, so that's one thing you have to keep in mind. When we're editing the stages to change the plan, we have to edit the main carriage stage, the one from the handover location. When we change that one, let's say if we wanted to change the source location here, all we have to do is add a new location. Okay, whether it's a port or an airport, and that will display the list of other locations that we have. Okay, you can be a little more specific in your search and select the new port that now will be our new handover location port. You would select it, and that one would automatically change here. Once that has been changed, all you would have to do is click on Save. And this change here will automatically change all other freight orders that are linked to it, all other legs. And then all you would have to do, all that's left to do is go here to the planned departure and change the date of the planned departure to maybe a later date, maybe the 18th. Once that's done, you would click on Save, and everything that is the job of the TS02, which is the assign of carrier and freight PO and the edit of freight orders with routes and dates, would be done. And that would be your last step here. I'm not going to change this one in this case, but if you wanted to change it, all you would have to do is click on Save. So far we've covered all the way from procure, plan, and procure freight. Tomorrow we'll go over the events, and I'll also review some of the planning and editing of freight orders. Okay, but before I close the session, any questions before we close this session? I know we went over the time, but I don't think anybody minded that. So if you have questions now, we can go through them, or you can add them to the chat. Anything you want me to review? Anybody? Anybody has a question on either planning, editing freight orders? I know it's a lot of info for one day, but again, tomorrow we're going to do it again, and then on Wednesday we're going to do it again. So it's going to be 3 days of repeating the same process. So I believe that if not by today, by Wednesday for sure you're going to understand the process. Okay, so if nobody intervenes, I'm just going to close the session. Okay, so we do have a hand raised. I think that's you, Christina.
Oh, sorry, it was by accident.
Okay, I got excited there. We had a question, but I guess not. Okay,
Sorry.
Christina. No problem. Anyone else? Now's the time. If not, you can always save your questions for tomorrow. Okay, Maria?
No questions. Thank you very much, Brian. It was very good presentation, very informative. I'm sure by tomorrow, when we see the material again, we will have some more questions for you.
Absolutely. Please do. And that's a good comment. For everybody, please review the presentations, test the exercises, run through the exercises that I'm going to email to you guys, and tomorrow we can have a better discussion. All right. Thank you, guys. So if no other questions, I'll just close the session now.